Alrighty, we are recording. Welcome everyone to the San Diego Patriots podcast, episode 30. Sitting here with my friend, Mr. Gabe Ruiz. How you doing, brother?
Hey, doing all right, man. Just enjoying my morning, you know?
Yeah. I appreciate it, man. I know we started off a little early here, but we're in beautiful downtown San Diego. Mm-hmm. How long you been living here?
I've been living here for about 14 months now, a little over a year,
Yeah, but you've been in San Diego for most of your adult life, at least, right?
Yeah, almost 20 years. It's basically 19 and a half years. I moved here for school for San Diego State. So, yeah, I've been here ever since now.
But you were raised NorCal,
Napa,
correct?
yeah.
Napa.
Yep,
okay,
Napa.
So wine country.
Yeah, I always feel blessed to, have moved from one beautiful place to another. I'm like, oh my God, Napa to San Diego. You can't go better than that, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to leave California. I mean, I'm sure you've traveled all over the place. Like, I know you just went to Spain about a month ago, right?
Yeah, I went to Europe. My first time in Europe, went for a month. I'd never been before. I got invited to a bachelor party out there. Went to Ibiza, Barcelona, and then went to all over Italy, basically, and then Paris and France. Visited my old roommate from college out there. He had a kid, so got to see him, make the most of the trip, and then went to the UK after that for a little bit too. So gone for a full month. It was amazing.
Wow. So you just took the whole time off from work, just kind of detach, reset a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, man. And the good thing is I can run, the work that I can do pretty much all over the world from my laptop. So it's kind of nice to be able to, even though I didn't plug in while I was there too much, but it was nice to be able to monitor stuff,
Yeah, for sure. And that was, one of the main reasons I was interested in talking to you. So I know, you and I briefly met a couple years ago, but, I myself, I've been in the world of sales for 5 years now and had my fair shares of, ups and downs and learned a lot as a person. But I always respect people who do well in the world of sales. And, you had a pretty good reputation at our last company. Like, what got you into sales and, how's it been going so far?
Yeah. So initially, obviously I went to San Diego State. I got my degree in international relations. That was, I thought about doing international business. And then I kind of fell into that, I don't know what to do after college phase. And I think a lot of people go through that. Unless you're a doctor, an engineer, or someone has a very specialized degree, you kind of, a lot of people what do you do, right? I was working in restaurants. I worked at some downtown here, and I bartended for a little bit. And one of the girls who is a good friend of mine still to this day, she recommended that I look at this company. She's like, and I was getting to the point, I was 24. I'd been out of college for about a year and a half. And I was like, also, I need health insurance, And I spent a lot of money. I paid for all my own college. I didn't have help from my family, not because they didn't want to, but just because it didn't work out, So I was like, I need to get a career. I need to do something with my life and not just bartend all the time, even though it was a lot of fun. And you still make a lot of money. It wasn't like when people talk about the service industry, the one thing I always say is that I was making more than most of my friends who were in entry-level white-collar jobs. It was like I was making a lot more. However you feel about that, but I was making more than all those people. So it wasn't a bad thing necessarily, but I wanted to take that next step and figure that out.
Something with a higher ceiling, right? That's usually why people make the switch, right?
Yeah. So little did I know I'd be at that company for 10 years, but it was a really, really, really great experience. Obviously met a lot of great people, and I learned the ropes of everything regarding sales. That company is a great company for, either make a career out of it or you start and move on to something else.
Structure, teaching you good skill sets, stuff you could take with you for the rest of your life.
And I think the one thing that I appreciate about that company is they kind of threw me into the fire, right? And kind of changed my mindset in regards to, I had always been a very, sometimes I do things without acting, but I'll never forget the gentleman who hired me. I had an intern for a year, which was one of the longest times that people had an intern. Most people intern for a few months and they got the job or they said no.
Yeah.
They liked me enough to where they kept me because I was doing well as an intern, but they weren't sure about my potential quite yet. But I remember in the initial interview just to get the internship, the VP at the time was like, if we hired you today, would you jump right onto the field and go sell and just figure it out, or would you take time to read a manual or doing it? And I'm very much a technical person. I was like, I want to be an expert in what I do. So I answered, I was like, I want to know what I'm selling, right? I want to read what I'm doing so I don't make a butt out of myself out there, But that's not what they wanted to hear. They want you to just jump into the fires, which kind of took me out of my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so I interned for a while. Eventually I got the job, right? I was okay for like the first year or two. I wasn't quite sure what to do still, because I'm very much a talker, but I think my biggest flaw is sometimes I'm go with the flow too much, and so unless I'm being pushed a little bit, at least when I was younger, I'm not going to push myself. And I had to kind of go through that fire, and forge myself into something better after those first couple of years. And then from then on out, once I got the hang of the job and I realized how easy you could make it with your time, and because I love that job so much, because, as we know, a lot of white collar jobs, you're sitting in an office 8 to 5. With that company they work for, if you crush it from 8 to noon, you can take off the rest of the day. I mean, you can still work and keep making money, but it gives you the freedom and flexibility to do other things. Yeah.
And that's interesting. You say that, because I know something that I've learned in my life so far is that you really do learn through repetition. So there is some sense to jumping into the fire, jumping into the deep end, and figuring it out. And me myself, I was kind of the opposite, where I was a little bit too anxious, where I wanted to be so perfect that I wouldn't actually get started. And I remember, in sales, you do a lot of cold calling, and that's something that, your first year, you're terrible at it until you actually get your reps in, get told to go F yourself, and, learn how to deal with being told no. But, so I came on the other end of that spectrum and then had to figure out how to go with the flow more. And it really is a balance, though. It's not like a one size fits all, right?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that helped me excel is, obviously I did all the cold calling, cold drops, and that kind of got me. It's so weird how it's different. In life, when you talk to, I can make friends with a stranger easily, especially even back then when I was younger. I can make friends with any stranger, but actually trying to approach them about a sale, I always kind of clammed up. I'm like, oh, I don't want you to think I'm somebody trying to use you, because I don't like being used. So I always thought of that too much when I was out there, and so I stumbled those first 2 years. I did well, but I wasn't crushing it by any means,
Yeah.
And eventually, once I got over that, I realized my strength is in building relationships, right? And one of the tenets of that company was for the long-term success of being a rep, you can't cold call forever. You're never gonna make great money just cold calling. You'll do well, but then your quota keeps going up and up and up. And how do you strengthen that long-term? Is you build relationships with the centers of influence that we could work with, right?
Yeah.
And once I just used my natural charm and personality on those people and treated them like an equal, right? Instead of me just transactionally making a sale with them, I was able to excel. And part of that allowed me to, when I eventually left the company, most of those people came with me. And even if they didn't come with me, they still talk to me, and they're still business partners in many other ways, So, yeah.
Yeah. And what did you find, so aside from getting yourself to get a little more, jump into the fire, all that good stuff, what else would you say was some of the earlier challenges, early off in your career? Because, the reason I ask is because a lot of people out there, especially in college or young adults, they're like, hey, I think I want to do this route. I think I want to do that route, but I'm scared to fail. And what if it doesn't work out? And failure is inevitable, right? So it's you do have to actually get your reps in and actually go through enough wins and losses to figure out more about yourself. But how did that journey go for you early on?
Yeah. Being scared of failure was one of my flaws too. I think time management was a huge problem for me, right? Because like I said, my natural personality, I'm a go with the flow person. So that's why I get along with most people, because I'm just like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. Oh yeah, I don't have all my appointments canceled for the rest of the day. I can, take a 4-hour lunch and chat it up, And so time management was huge for me, because my whole academic career, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, I'm a smart guy, right? Things come easy to me. The drawback to that is I don't work hard as much. On things that I work hard for sure. I work on my cars, I'll spend there all day doing that. But if a subject comes easy to me, I don't study, right? I never had to study for tests or anything like that. So I excelled by doing shit at the last minute, I'd be studying the night before and I'd get an A or B, and people studying for a week, and I'm like, I don't do that. I don't want to do that. And it already comes easy to me. So why am I going to sit down for a week? So the problem was going into the career field, right? You can't just kind of wing it every day, because eventually that's going to catch up to you. And so I think a lot of us are trained from a young age, especially in the school system that we're doing, memorize facts, do this, do that, right? actually learning to wield that and use that in the real world, and also adapt to the surroundings around you and what your job expects of you, that was hard for me.
Yeah.
Because I would sit there sometimes, especially with cell phones and social media come out. Like, I have no problem saying there was times when I was just sitting and scrolling on the eBay or Instagram, like looking for
scrolling,
stuff.
wasting your time.
Yeah, and I was like, I could have made more sales, during that time. So time management, that's my biggest thing. And still sometimes to this day, sometimes even with my own job, I'm like, well, I can do that later,
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, I'm doing well now, so it doesn't matter too much. Mm-hmm. But every day I kind of have to remind myself not to waste time, right, for certain things,
Yeah. So you mentioned an interesting point there with wasting time on your cell phone, right? So like for me, for everyone, the pandemic was in 2020. So I graduated at SCSU 2019.
Yeah.
So I was only in the workforce for like a year in the office before the pandemic and being forced to work from home. And like, I think that first year was, for me, I didn't know much about good habits or like know about my own pitfalls, but I went through the same thing. Like, you're working from home. It's hard not to go do laundry or go sit on the freaking couch and like not get dialed in. How was the pandemic? Like, how was that transition for you? Because you had been working in the field for much longer. You were accustomed to that life, being in the office, like doing the handshaking face to face, and like, boom, all of a sudden the whole world is behind a laptop.
Yeah, I think it was interesting going back to the centers of influence thing. Like, unlike like some of the new people like you who started right before or right during the pandemic, I had relationships that I had established for years before that. And so most of my business, I would say 80 to 90% of my business came from them,
Gotcha.
And so one of the things that helped me excel during the pandemic was having those relationships established already. And so I would just kind of do my normal routine, which I feel guilty saying because I feel like so many people struggled, and it was a hard transition, even for me in certain points, right? But I think what helped me is that like I already had kind of my routine down at that point. 2020, I'd already been there for 8 years at the company, so I kind of was in my groove already. And everybody trusted me, all my COIs trusted me to do the right things for their clients. And despite what many people think, obviously we can talk about the world we're in. There was a lot of companies that were starting up during the pandemic still. A lot of them shut down, right? But a lot of them were starting up. And so I was still getting a lot of business, especially from out of state and states that weren't as locked down. A lot of my accountant and tax persons that I was working with were still, even if they weren't opening a lot of companies in California, they were still opening companies in like Arizona, New Mexico, Delaware, Florida. And so it allowed me to obtain a lot of business still. I think one of the other things too is like I also was dating someone who excelled as well. And I think one thing that is hard for me sometimes to admit is that like I feed off other people's energy. Yeah. I'm a self-starter, but sometimes, like I said, I fall into that like, I can do it tomorrow kind of phase, and unfortunately it wasn't healthy for our like actual relationship, but like having to compete against your partner, who's one of the top people in the company too. We would go back and forth, in our region. It kind of pushes you a little bit because you're like, I'm still competitive. I'm not going to lose, Yeah. And then it's kind of funny, just like the difference in like the work window, right? That the way I work versus the way someone else's work, you kind of feed off each other in different ways,
Yeah. And, there's that old saying that you are the sum of the 5 people you're around the most.
Yeah.
So it's definitely helpful to be with, a partner who is a shark and is someone who's hustling, right?
Yeah.
So like even, I resonate with that because I, live with my brother. My brother's only 1 year older than me. Mm-hmm. We're both in sales. We both try to kind of compete with one another. And I think that allowed us both to excel very quickly because we're bouncing ideas off of each other, but we're also not okay with just sitting on our ass, right? We weren't okay with accepting that. So it's I'm not surprised that had its pros for you. But that must have been interesting, like working at the same company as your partner, right? Like you guys weren't with each other too much, or?
Yeah, I mean, well, during the pandemic, we were around together every day, pretty much, right? Because what are you gonna do? I was still, driving around, and a lot of my accountants were still like open, so like, I'd go meet them at their house or I'd go meet them at their office. Nobody really cared,
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, it's interesting, as we know at our old company, a lot of people dated, just maybe not openly all the time. time, but
Yeah.
it kind of happened, so.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that at the time there was a lot of there were still businesses getting started. So I know for me that was my first exposure to selling, either software or services to small businesses, right? And a lot of the folks that I would talk to are like, man, screw California, I'm going to Texas and Florida. Like, how did that impact your book of business? Was that something that you didn't expect, or like, what was your take on it?
I expected it 100% because I agreed with it.
Yeah.
Like it's funny because I actually got interviewed during the pandemic on Fox News. I was at one of my clients in Chula Vista. He owns a few restaurants, and like coming from the service industry and coming from small business, and working with those people about 8 years up to that point, it hit their bottom line so bad.
Yeah.
And you feel for them, because people don't understand like the impact that some of these regulations had on businesses. And it didn't matter what industry. And the only ones that really did very well during the pandemic are, shipping companies and like trucking companies. They crushed it. I mean, they did very well because everybody's ordering everything from home, But like, think about it. Even restaurants with takeout, right, and like DoorDash, they're not getting people into their restaurant to buy other things. You're just getting your food. So you're not buying the upsell on drinks or anything.
The experience
that you may get in there. And so you feel for these people. I didn't blame them for wanting to, do things illegally or like reopen and do this and that, because you understand how highly regulated a lot of this stuff is. And like, they're paying insurance. It's not like they got a break on their mortgages, or their lease during the pandemic. They still had to pay that. So you had to figure out ways to do business, and
still had their employees to pay. And another thing, and a lot of these folks this is their life and blood, right?
Yeah.
You meet these mom and pop restaurants who are so passionate about the business that they've built over the past few decades, just to see, the government kind of come in and really make their life a lot harder. And sometimes they shut down, which is horrible to see.
Yeah. Well, and people, like I said, another thing to piggyback off that is like people don't realize the cost of doing business, right?
Yeah.
We go into a restaurant and we're like, yeah, it's kind of expensive, but you don't realize the cost of food went up during the pandemic. The cost of labor went up during the pandemic. Employees are taking, even it's legitimate, right? A lot of employees were taking sick days that they didn't need, right? And I understand that because you can't legally ask, and I get why they do that. You can't legally ask why someone takes a sick day. And then people, like, obviously, as we know, like the younger generations, kind of silent quitting, not showing up for work, and like I try to see both sides of the argument. I just know that like seeing the business owners struggle when they have poured all their money into that company and they have a freaking $10,000 a month lease. You have all these employee costs, you have insurance costs, you have utility costs. There's no break on that, right?
Yeah.
So I just really felt for them during that, and I wanted people to do business still, and I helped them. I wanted to see them succeed too, so I would give them leads. I would say, hey, look at this, look at that, depending on what industry they're in,
Yeah.
Try to help them get through that,
Yeah, and you don't have to mention company names, but were there any scenarios where you really did see a specific business or case that was negatively impacted, maybe the worst? And then did you also see any folks that really took advantage of that and excelled more than they would have expected to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm thinking back on that. A lot of I do have a lot of restaurant clients that struggled, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of them shut down, or they just had to cut their labor, and people don't understand, like we were talking about a minute ago, is that like you have to make cuts somewhere, and then you don't want to see people lose their jobs or anything either, but unfortunately, if you don't have the bandwidth of customers coming through, you have to make those cuts. So mostly restaurants I saw. Obviously, bars were shut down even more than most restaurants. They can't do takeout. If you're a full-service bar, what are you going to do? You still got a mortgage to pay. You can't even open for anything,
No drinks to go, right?
No drinks to go, So they struggled a lot. The ones that I did see excel, a lot of construction companies.
Okay.
You think about it, people are sitting around. They're looking at their house during the pandemic, and that's what a lot of them told me. Like, they see projects like, oh, well, they're getting a little money back from the government,
Finally get my backyard redone.
Yeah. So, like, I have a pool company that crushed it during the pandemic. They made a ton of money, best they've ever done. They didn't qualify for any of the tax credits for businesses because they made too much money during the pandemic, So you like to see that, you like to see them succeed. But you also feel for, like, a lot of businesses, because obviously I work with bankers too, and you see a lot of BS too, because I would see companies that really needed PPP loans that would get not approved from. A lot of my restaurant clients didn't get much, or they were waiting forever. And you see some guy opening up his, S Corp with all his family, doing some BS thing, to get a loan that's not legitimate,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. You see that. You heard about it, and it made me sad because you really know that there are businesses that needed that money.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people taking advantage of the situation and making up fake companies and doing things to get PPP loans. And obviously a lot of them gotten caught now, so
I was going to say,
F 'em,
yeah.
but like, you just feel for them, for the people who needed that money during the pandemic to actually survive and keep their employees on staff,
Yeah, and now that, to your point, now that we're 4 years later, we have started to see some of the consequences of people who were doing things a little dirty, or even politicians who weren't supposed to be taking that money and were taking it. So it's shameful, because when you're in that type of catastrophe, and it really was, right? Like no one knows what's going on. It's like, hey, the whole world shuts down for, let's call it 2 to 4 weeks. Makes sense to me. Like, we don't know what's going on, but after that, hey, maybe it's a little bit safer to shut things down because you don't know what's getting spread around. But what's the negative impact to the economy? What's the negative impact to the mom and pop owners who own these businesses? So the way I see it was, a lot of the people who were justifying all the lockdowns were saying, well, no, we need to think of safety first. And it's like, sure, but what are the negative consequences? And now that we've been 4 years later, we've really seen this thing take a massive negative impact on the world. So in my view, not a good idea. And when you see these places like Florida or even Sweden, I think those were 2 places that shut down for 2-3 weeks and then said, okay, nothing else is really happening here. Like, we want to keep our kids going to school, right? We want to keep our businesses going. And I didn't even think about the school aspect, but most places, even in California, kids weren't in school for 2 years. That's not good, right? Like, we want strong, capable American citizens. And when these kids are just playing on their Nintendo all day and like jerking off, like, you're not going to freaking learn anything.
No. Well, and there's a biological consequence too on top of that, because they talk about in the early years, kids at school are supposed to be getting dirty. They're supposed to be exposed to germs and bacteria because it makes their immune system stronger over time. And when you're not putting that, what happened to most of the kids when they came back to school 2 years later? They got sick, right? There was a ton of illnesses going around in the beginning when people came back because you weren't exposed to anything for 2 years.
Yeah.
They were sheltered in. And then the loss of that human dynamic, right? Of interacting with kids and learning social norms, or what we consider social norms for the most part. There's kids that lost that completely at ages where that's imperative, right? That determines how you're going to be, not necessarily for the rest of your life, but for a good portion of your young childhood, And then I always felt for I know people, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but like high school kids that miss out on prom. I felt for that because that was such a great experience for me when I was younger. And that's a huge turning point in like a teenager's life. It's a big deal, at least, for most of our history that's been around.
Yeah.
It's like a coming of age event.
Transitioning to adulthood.
Yeah. And it's a part where, especially if you're a young man, you're asking a girl to go to the prom with you. That's a big deal, and then your parents are happy you're taking pictures. It's a family bonding thing, whether you think so or not. When I look back on it, I'm like, my parents took pictures with us. It was like a big moment.
Yeah.
And that's the least of anybody's worries around the world, but still, it's like, it is for Americans at least, that's a big part of our growing up,
Yeah.
So I felt more for the kids, that they miss out on a lot of stuff that shapes your environment and shapes the way you look at the world.
Yeah.
I obviously felt bad for a lot of older people that did lose their lives, and it's always a tragedy. My thing is that with a lot of that stuff is that you can die any day. I've learned, I lost my mother when I was 11 from cancer, a very rare cancer that at the time there's only 3 or 4 people in the United States that had, right?
Wow.
So the way I kind of shape life around that, because I grew up pretty quickly, right, is that life isn't taken, you shouldn't take it for granted. Obviously, I think we've all can say we've lost people due to car accidents, drug, over time you start losing people, young people, older people. And so with people dying during the pandemic, you feel for them, but you're also like, yeah, I could have walked outside and got killed tomorrow. I could have got hit by a car. I could have got pneumonia. All these different things can kill us every day. We live in one of the most advanced times in society, so the fact that we're even living this long is a blessing in itself.
Yeah.
People didn't have these luxuries in this, every day you had to find for food, and there's still people around the world that have to fight for food every day.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Like with the whole thing with the pandemic, I think is like overblown, right, in a way. And I also was saying, and I'm not going to say I'm some biology expert, but I know enough about it because I did study science for a long time in high school and college. I took a lot of classes in science. When they first came out and said it's a type of coronavirus, right? That's related to the flu. I immediately knew that those viruses evolve every year. I mean, it's in our basic biology books, right? That it's going to turn into something like the flu shot, where you're going to have to get it. It's going to evolve just like most
Black Plague.
Right? No, because it's not like other things where it can kill. Yes, are there some people that died relatively young? Yeah, few and far between. Not as many as older people, as we know with the stats that release. But it's not something like smallpox where you can die instantly, at any age. Just by being exposed to it, pretty quickly, right? And so I told everybody, I was like, this is going to be like another flu shot. You're going to get one if you choose to get that, which I don't get the flu shot, and I never get sick. But it's going to be every winter, and older people need to watch out for it because their immune systems are compromised. They're older, and they can die from a lot of things, not just that. It's not just, COVID. It could be the flu. They could die from pneumonia. They can die from this. So, that was kind of my viewpoint on a lot of that stuff, and I got shit for it for sure.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like hardcore on one side or the other. You want to have a human aspect to it, to where you feel for people's loss and things like that. And
to think for yourself about it, which is what it sounds like you did. And
I did what I thought, and I got it twice.
Yeah.
And it was funny because my girlfriend at the time didn't get it, and I had it. The whole time, and we were laughing about it. I was like, we kiss every day and you never got it once, Yeah.
It happened with me and my brother, where I live with him and I'm very close with him, and he got it maybe once or twice, and I was one of the weirdos out there who just never got it. Just kind of weird how it works like that. But, similar to what we were talking about now that we're 4 years after the pandemic and we've kind of seen like all the BS surfacing now, right? Is I think a lot of us now see it as, there was a potential concern at first, but I think really the government used it as a means of control and kind of a catastrophe to capitalize on, to make policy changes, to receive money, move money, and then it ended up just being a bunch of BS that had negative impacts on us. But there was one thing you mentioned about your mom, and I didn't know that, right? One of the things that I always talk about is, because there's a book I always refer to called The Obstacle is the Way, right? So it's a book about stoicism's author Ryan Holiday. I could share some links after, but really the concept of it is like the bigger the obstacle you run into, the more you will grow and learn from it, right?
Yeah.
So you see people who survive cancer, and they're some of the happiest people in the world, right? Like people who, like including my mother, who went through pretty horrific, refugee experiences and atrocities. She's one of the happiest people I know, right? It really has a big impact on you. And, unfortunately, your mother passed away when you were 11, but I'm not surprised that, you yourself are a hustler, you're an entrepreneur, you like to, you're a kind of a happy individual, high energy, like well socialized. And I'm not surprised because it sounds like, you had to overcome that mentally as a young man and now appreciate life more and aren't just sitting on your ass, like expecting things for people to give you, but you again, you're kind of taking life by the horn. So I'm not surprised by that.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think with my mother, it was interesting because, not to keep talking about it, but it's interesting because I always feel blessed that we had time with her because we knew she was going to pass. It was not a matter of...
Wasn't immediate?
No, she had got cancer. They went to Europe, and she found out my parents went to Europe for like the first time. I think my mom had been once before with her sister, but my dad and my mom, it was their first trip to Europe. They went to France, and she just got really sick. They found out, thank God, a childhood friend, her dad was a surgeon at Kaiser Vallejo, and he cleared her to fly back because my dad couldn't afford to pay for all that stuff in Europe, with no insurance in Europe, So they got her back eventually. They found out, she had tumors, in her stomach. She got operated on, went through chemo, all that stuff. And then it reappeared. I can't remember the time frame because I think this was 96 when she got it. She passed away in 99. So within a matter of years, but she got it. It came back, and the second time, basically, they said, it was in her capillaries in her stomach, right? And they said, there's like a 70% chance if we operate on you, you're gonna die on the operating table. And she didn't want to go through chemo again, and they said it wouldn't work really either. So she basically lived out a year. I think it was about a year and a half. I'd have to ask my dad, but it was about a year and a half where we knew she was gonna die. It's just a matter of when. So I feel. The one thing I do is I feel very blessed to have had that time because some people don't know your dad might die tomorrow and you never got to say anything to him,
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm always thankful that I got that last year and a half with her, whatever time it was, to do things with her and to learn from her. And I'll never forget, I tell people this all the time because that's how much my mom was about education, because both my brother and I excelled in education and we did well in school. And she's like, hey, I want you, make sure if I go, like, you guys need to don't dwell on everything, go to school, like, make sure. And some people think it's weird, but literally she died. I should know the date. I used to know it. Sometime in March. It was like 2 weeks before my birthday. And I went to school the next day.
Wow.
And everybody's coming up to you and stuff and saying thank you, like, I feel sorry for you. But, like, my mom wanted that. She didn't want to, and I didn't feel like I had been prepared for it already.
Yeah.
A year and a half of, like, any day your mom could be sick. I mean, you don't think about it every day, but it's something that, like, even as I was 11 years old, I knew, because I was a smart kid. I was reading all the time. So I went to school and, everything was fine, but, it definitely shaped the way I view life. And that's why people always ask me, like, how are you so happy every day? And I'm like, well, because I don't, like, it's not like subconsciously or even consciously up front. I just know that, like, there could be worse things,
Yeah.
I'm kind of self-aware of not only my own experience, but the experiences that other people have had, losing loved ones or whoever it may be. And also the plights of the world.
Yeah.
Like I'd mentioned earlier, there's so much worse shit going on in the world.
Yeah.
I'm blessed that I grew up here. My parents grew up poor. They used to pick fruit in the orchards, and they made something of themselves, to the best of their abilities, while trying to raise kids. And so there's people out there still picking fruit, that haven't gone past that. And I've always, like, thank God, that I'm here, because I could be there, and I could be struggling still, or my parents could have never made that leap, And there's still a lot of people going through that stuff. So I'm like, why would I complain about, parking in downtown, or like, oh, the door doesn't work in our building, and like, oh my God, like.
Yeah, really help instill gratitude and humility in you, which I think, again, helps you do better in relationships and do better in business and just overall life.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your parents lived the American dream, right? And that's something that I'm big on too. Like, my parents were pretty poor as well, right? But they did everything that they were supposed to do, where hustled their ass off, worked multiple jobs until they could pay for school. It took, decades to pay off debt, but they were glad that they did it and started from the bottom and were able to make something out of their lives. And, hey, we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but we had food in the fridge and we had better conditions than my parents. And I hope to bring better conditions to my kids. And I'm sure, the same for you someday, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, like, my cousin was just here yesterday. He's, the oldest, actually second oldest cousin, and, like, he's about 10. He's like 12 years older than me, so he's like
older of the generation.
Yeah, was, because his dad is like a few years older than my dad, so that he had kids really young. But we were talking about that yesterday. We were talking about self-determination, right? Because so both sides of my family, my mother and my dad's, they're one of 7 kids, and it's funny because they're opposites: 5 girls and 2 boys on my mom's side, 5 boys and 2 girls on my dad's side, right? But then also my grandparents, they're each like one of 14 or 15, right? The Mexican, so there's a lot of kids. And, like, back then, like, even some of the kids passed away, they didn't make it. They lived on farms, they didn't have access to medicine. So people realize, if you look back not too long ago, less than 100 years ago, kids died, and like,
and you had more kids to have more help around the family, right? So you guys could all make it as a unit.
Yep. But it was interesting because we were having this conversation and we're like, out of our family, right? Out of our immediate family, at least, we're probably the 2 most successful. We definitely are, like, in terms of like what we've accomplished and stuff. And my brother's right there too now. Obviously he's younger than us, so he's got a little bit to go. But you look at the differences in styles of parenting, with some of the brothers, some of the kids, even distant cousins, and like, some of them just don't have it, for whatever reason, right? And so you see, like, one thing I learned from my ex, even though I hated it, and I always share it because it's like we didn't have the best relationship, but there are some things I learned from it. And one of them is, if you want it bad enough, you'll make it happen, right? And that always will stick with me for the rest of my life because it's true, right? Yes, are there extenuating circumstances where something happens where it's even harder for people to pull out of like a bucket of where they're born, right?
Yeah.
But then I look at my dad. My dad grew up in a crap hole in Campbell, and then his family, like, they all came from Mexico, right? And there's like not only him, but there's his 14 uncles, who all have different sects of the family. They're all living in Campbell. They all make the move to Northern California, like Dixon area, right? Some succeed, some of them don't, right? And they all came from the same people, right? But they all had different lives, different people, but some of them wanted it more than others. My dad never wanted to live on that. He moved us, we were talking about this yesterday, he moved us away. We were not born in Dixon like the rest of my cousins or any of the other families. You know, my dad wanted us to get away from that.
Yeah.
He's like, he took us to Napa, or we were born in Napa, but like he wanted to be out of there, so we weren't around all the family.
Slightly different environment to shape you, and for the better, it sounds like.
Yeah. And so I look at that, and I going back to that thing, it's like, you know, I've learned. There are times when I've been lackadaisical and I didn't want it bad enough and I failed, you know, and that shaped me to who I'd be, you know, and that's what I think.
Learn your lesson. You
learn your lesson, or you don't, right? Yeah. Sometimes you make the same mistake a few times and you got to kind of go through that. But I'm a firm believer, like in that saying, if you want it bad enough, you'll make it happen, right? And reflecting back on my career at ADP, I struggled. Like, I didn't struggle. I was always above plan, you know, but I didn't excel because I was just going with the motion, right? And then I determined I was like, you know what? F this, dude. Like, I'm so much more talented than this. Like, I always have done well in everything I do. Why am I just kind of floating around right here, you know? And I made it happen.
Yeah.
I worked my ass off to get to where I needed to go. And then once you get the taste of that, you don't want to go down again.
Yeah.
You know, and so once you get that taste of success, you want to keep moving forward. And whether you stay at that level and you're happy there, or you want to keep making more and more money, you know, or whatever success means to you, you definitely don't want to go back down, you know, or if you do fall back down, you want to get back up immediately as possible. Right.
Yeah.
And so those are the things I think about now as I move forward in this, you know, second half of my life, right? Where do I want to be? What does success mean to me? And how do I obtain what I had or maintain the level that I'm at, you know? And I think those lessons and those sayings like really shape my understanding of the world now and, you know, what I want out of it, you know?
Yeah, and that differs from a lot of folks from our generation and younger, which, you know, because I've had a lot of conversations with people about how they want to improve their lives. And something that I've noticed is common that I didn't know before because it just wasn't as common in my family, but the philosophy of nihilism, right? There's a lot of people out there who are nihilistic, right? Who say, well, there's no point, right? Well, why would I try? You know, I could do everything right and still be miserable and fail, so why even try? And then they end up just having bad habits and making wrong decisions, and then their life ends up worse when they could have controlled it for the better, right? So the first year of this podcast, I called it APE, so the American Pursuit of Excellence, right? And the pursuit of excellence is one of my mottos, right? Because regardless of what situation you're in, I think you should aim upward. Yeah. It doesn't matter, even if you're in a crapshoot, right? And just absolutely crappy conditions, or even if you're a billionaire, like you should still aim upward. I think that will help. Even if you have all the money in the world and you don't need to work, figure out some form of responsibility that you can get better at. And you yourself will end up waking up happier, right? So I could see that contrast from, you know, how I think you and I think, and a lot of other folks out there who are struggling. But that does lead me to one of the questions I had. So you mentioned self-determination, right? Yeah. So I love understanding, you know, for successful and happy people, what philosophy drives them. So like self-determination, is that from a book you read, or is that from, you know, a mentor you used to have, or how did you adopt that, and what other philosophies like guide you towards striving for more?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things, right? I think it's one of the things was work smarter, not harder, right? So I always wanted a balance in my life to, you know, pursue the leisures that I like to do, right? I have one of my strengths and one of my weaknesses, it depends on how you look at it, right, is I have a lot of different interests, right? I like, you know, cars, I like skateboarding, I like basketball, I like, you know, those are activities, but there's a lot of different things that I like to do, and I like to read, you know, I like to do this, I like to, you know, travel. And so I wanted to pursue all those things. Well, how do you do that, right? How do you get to a point where you have the time? There's not enough time in a day to do most of those things, but how do you get that down to a level where you can at least maintain those leisures and fun things that you like to do? And so that was a big driver. And like, how do I make this not feel like a job, right? Yeah. How do I make this feel fun, right? So at my old company, right, I definitely made it as easy as possible for myself by building relationships that have, like I said, transcended that company now that I'm out on my own, right? And also while maintaining the maximum potential that I could obtain from each person, right? Whether it's through the company, through business that we're doing together through that former company, or potential ventures that we can do outside of that company, right? And so that's a huge driver in that. One of the people that I looked up to the most too, even though it's not like something I thought about day to day, but I always watched his lifestyle, was a gentleman named Nadeem that I used to work with, who was only a few years older than me, but he's built a very successful real estate empire, not only here in San Diego, but, Riverside, Vegas, a few other places. And, he taught me a lot of valuable lessons that you kind of take to heart, especially as you're progressing through your career, like, hey, this is not this is not the end all be all. It can be, and some people have made a great career out of some of these companies they work for, right? But ultimately, like, if it was such a great company, why are there there not people working here for 20 years in our office, 15 years, right? And these, like I said, it's something that shapes you, that, where you work, but you also want more, right? Watching him and seeing the lifestyle that he lived, and also, he works very hard, right? Like, he still works very hard every day. It's not an easy job, but watching him kind of operate and seeing the lifestyle he's able to attain, it kind of pushes you. Yeah. Like, he's only a few years older than me, but he was successful at the perfect time when the first crash hit. He bought his first couple houses, with his family and partners and stuff with the money he was making at our former company, and kind of just took off from there. And you're like, well, how do I do that? How do I get there? Even if I don't mirror exactly what he does, I want to get to a point where I can have the lifestyle that he has, with the freedom to be able to take off, for a month in vacation, or to do this, or, whatever it may be, So I think there was a few people like that. A gentleman named Sean too, who taught me a lot, that worked there. A lot of people that I learned from were people that I worked with, right? Because they're the closest people to you. Like you said,
spend the most time with them, they shape you.
Exactly. And then even some of my clients. A lot of my clients are my friends now. I've been to some of their weddings, I've been to their birthdays, and most people would say I would never I remember people at our former company saying I would never hang out with a client, right? Well, screw you guys, because most of those people are my friends now, and that allowed me to
enjoy working with them.
Enjoy working with them, which goes back to, like, having fun with your job too while still working hard, and then also bring them when I left, And so watching some of their successes and pitfalls too allowed me to kind of shape my destiny too, because they're like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. This is, I'm going here, and you're like, well, how are you doing that? Like, well, I'm doing this for, 1031 exchange, or do another property and this and that, and you pick up all these little life hacks and skills from people more experienced from you. And I think that's like the one thing that I see, and not everybody, but in younger generations, is we don't listen to older people most of the time.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with them or not, right? You don't have to, like, they're not all perfect either, but I think there's a lot of things you can pick up, not only from their day-to-day lives, but listening to them and respecting them, and learning that they may not have all the answers, but they may at least be able to help you in some way not take the same path they did, whether they're successful or not. And I think that's like one thing I've always keep an eye out for too, is learning, right? Listening and learning. The easiest things you can do in life you don't, like they say, most of these you don't have to be a great idea man all the time. You can literally copy what someone else is doing and have a pretty good life, right? Yeah. They say, like, with entrepreneurship, it's not always the first guy there that is the most successful. It's the second or third guy that sees all their pitfalls, make, the mistakes they made, and you can take a technology or an idea and make it even better, right? Napster was the first music sharing company. It wasn't the most successful one, right? Obviously, there are companies that have improved upon that, and that's just one example, obviously, but that's kind of how life works too, even on a small level, like what we're doing,
Yeah, and the takeaway there is be open to learning, right? And it sounds like, you yourself, you always wanted more for yourself, so aiming upward, but you also had a curiosity, right? Like, how the fuck is this guy so successful? What's he doing, right?
Yeah.
How did he overcome that adversity? How did he deal with that failure, right? And you learn from those mistakes. And I'm huge on mentorship, right? Like, put work aside. You want to lose weight? Go find someone who's fit and ask them what you should be eating. Go ask them what supplements you should take. How do I work out? Hey, I want bigger biceps. How do I do that? Go find a fucking buff guy and they'll teach you, right? Or if you do take it to the professional world, I don't care if you want to be a nurse or a firefighter, like, go find a nurse or a firefighter and ask them how they got the job. How does someone in my position get hired? How should I tweak my resume, right? Like, you can learn so much from people, but to your point, there are a lot of people, mainly in the younger generation, who think that they know it all. And that's, I don't care if we're 1,000 years ago, you need to learn from folks who are older and from the older generation. And one of my tips from people is find your nearest old person and ask them about life, right? Like I like to talk to people who are 60 years old and plus. I have several on my podcast in some of the earlier episodes, and those guys can teach you a lot, right? And you're a fool to not accept that and to not pursue that, in my view.
Yeah, and I think there's a point to where too you have to do a lot of like, if some people have to work harder, right? So I always use this example. My brother was heavy, younger, and especially when my mom passed away, he gained a lot of weight. He just was a little kid, he's 7 years old. So it affected him in a different way than it did me, right? But, we used to tease him, I was a prick to him when I was younger. We used to give him shit, me and all my friends, and that's what you do to little brothers. We maybe went on him a little too hard sometimes, but him and my best friend from back home, a good friend I've known since second grade, both were heavy guys, and they lost weight. They had to work harder. And what I talk about a lot when people complain, and I'll give you an example of this, why I say this in the self-determination thing, right? My brother worked his ass off to lose his weight, and he right when I left for college, he lost weight the immediate next year. Maybe it was because I wasn't around. I don't know, kicking his ass all the time. But still, it's an example of like, he didn't complain about it. He never whined to anybody about like, oh, you need to accept me for being a big guy.
He wasn't a victim.
Yeah, he didn't even think about it. I mean, the little I remember, he's not like complaining or whining about it, right? He didn't have a victim mentality. He just set out one day and he's like, I'm tired of everybody making fun of me. I'm going to do this, and he did it. And like, I have a friend back home, not like a great friend, but someone I went to high school with, who every year, and I give her shit on Facebook, I need to lose weight. I wish I had my old body. I'm like, well, I've told her, I'm like, fucking do it.
Yeah.
Why are you complaining every year? Like, there's so many ways to, like, you can fucking follow an Instagram routine. You can do this. You don't have to like, but you have to take an internal look at yourself. Like, am I not strong enough? Do I need help with this?
Yeah, it's taking ownership of your situation.
Taking ownership. Stop whining.
Yeah.
Right? I think sometimes, like, I feel like, and not that I think everybody's whined once or twice. Everybody's done it.
We're human.
We're human, right? But I think it comes to a point where it's boy who cried wolf, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stop complaining about everything. Make something happen. You look at somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? There's a Bill Burr joke where he always makes fun of, like, he's like one of the greatest men in the world because look at it. He's like, became Mr. Olympia. Not only did he lift weights, he became the best bodybuilder of all time, right? He's like, no, I'm not going to rest on that. Now I'm going to become the biggest action star. Who would have thought a guy who could barely speak English becomes the biggest action star in the world, right?
Yeah.
So makes some of the most memorable movies of all time. Then he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Now I'm going to become governor of a state I can't even pronounce the name of, you know?
Yeah.
And not only that, I'm going to marry a Kennedy. And I love that joke because it just shows how, like I said, going back, if you really want something and you have that self-determination and you can funnel your energy into those things and really make that tough decision, like, I'm going to do this. Whether I fail or not is of no consequence. I have to go all in, right? He made those things happen, but he went all in.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't half-ass it.
He made the sacrifices necessary, right?
Yeah, and it cost him some things along the way, right?
Yeah.
His family, and some things, mistakes he made, but I don't think he would trade it in for everything that he's done. He's done some great things for the world, like, just even as a movie star, like, you don't even look at his political career, but he's inspired people to lift weights. He's inspired people to do this, and those little things that people pick up on. We may laugh at some of that stuff, like, oh, but maybe some guy, maybe some actor who we don't even know watched one of his movies, when he was a kid and saw, this guy could barely speak English become a movie star. You never know, right?
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of young bodybuilders who have their Arnold Schwarzenegger poster on the wall, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have idols and you have to have mentors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone to look up to and say, oh shit, that's possible. Great,
Yeah.
now I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to make that sacrifice. Like they always say, like, in relationships, you have to go all in. You can't in order to have a quality relationship or a quality success with something, you have to go all in.
Yeah.
They say, the thing that I always say, and I've learned this, is like, you're not going to make money if you don't take risks, right?
Yeah.
You can, yes, can you work a stable job for the rest of your career? And that's totally admirable. And I could have gone that path too, right? And been happy, right, for the most part. But in order to really truly get to where you want, you have to make sacrifices. Yeah. Not everybody's prepared to make that, and not everybody will, right? I think sometimes we think everybody should be an entrepreneur, and yes, I hope that everybody gets to find their passion in life and make some money doing it, right? But some people are born to be worker bees.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it that way, but there are. But you're always going to need them, right? And we hope that they find something that makes them happy, or they get out of that mold, or they find someone that inspires them to pull them out of that. But I think ultimately there's always going to be people like that, you know?
Yeah.
That's how you build a society, whether you agree with it or not. You have to have people doing remedial tasks, you know?
Yeah, and even, I mean, almost every single entrepreneur I know started off with having a stable job and career, and that's how you make your money at first, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, hey, I was blessed to, you know, when I graduated college, I had $0 in debt, and then I had $0 in my pocket.
Yeah.
And it was up to me to fucking do something about it. So I love my career. I'm going to continue doing it until maybe the podcast, you know, makes me is a full-time job. Maybe I invest in other things. But like, you know, a lot of people I talk to are like, well, yeah, I mean, I would love to have a business and stuff, but like, I don't have any money, or I don't know where to start, but it's like, that's fine. Like, you know, work 2 jobs if you need to. Eventually you won't have to, but like make the sacrifices in the moment, and you'll work your way out of it. When
I first started ADP, up until a ways into my career, even I was working 3 jobs still. Yeah. I worked at that time I was working I think I just left PF Chang's right when I went back home for a few months. I got the job at ADP, and I came back from Napa down to San Diego, and I worked at a catering company. I worked at a restaurant across the street from my house, and I'd come home from my old job, and I'd go walk across the street and work a shift, you know, and then I'd work for the catering company on the weekends, you know. And I did that as long as I could, because I knew that the money wasn't guaranteed, and I knew that I wanted to get to some place where I'd be comfortable on one job, right? I don't think a lot of people want to do that, because I meet people still to this day that are like complaining about money, and I'm like, well, why don't you get a second job? Nobody wants to do it.
Yeah.
But if you're a survivalist, you got to make those sacrifices. You might have to sacrifice your relationship, time with your girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it may be. They complain about money. They complain about having stuff. And no, like I said, yes, is the economy a little skewed right now, and things aren't what they should be? Yeah. But ultimately, in times of survival, you have to make those sacrifices to get that, right?
Yeah, control your controllables.
That's all you can control. Do I need to get a second job, a third job? Do I need to do this? Do I need to keep looking for jobs even though I have a great job? Like, you know, yeah, you do. Yeah. If you want to get there, you got to do that, man. And I just wish more people understood that. I'm tired of people complaining about their situation and not making an effort to correct it, even if it's a small effort. Yeah. Something is better than nothing, right? You know, and
well, and that's the human experience too. Like, whether or not you're religious, you know, ancient texts such as like the Bible or Taoism, Buddhism, all these different philosophies from all over the world all agree that you, as a human, do need to be able to sacrifice immediate gratification for the long-term goal. Yeah. Right? Hey, you want a 6-pack? Yeah, I'm sorry, but you can't keep shoveling Snickers and candy in your mouth, right? Like, yes, it feels good, right? Like, okay, if you want a long-term relationship, yeah, you can't be just banging every chick that is in your, you know, sight. So it's basically like, but again, it's like, whether you're religious or not, like, you do have to be able to make sacrifices in the moment, knowing that the end goal and the grass is greener on the other side, right?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's like, I think people lose sight of it. And I think we're all guilty. I've lost sight of things before. I'm not going to sit here from my ivory tower and say that, you know, I've had tons of challenges. I've made tons of errors, tons of mistakes in judgment, you know,
for sure,
as well. But I think that you have to travel those paths, you know. And like I said, I always tell people it could be worse. Yeah, we're very, you know, we live in a first world country. You know, it may not be perfect. Healthcare may not be perfect. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect. But do I have to worry about walking down the street and getting shot or raped or killed or, you know, anything like that? No, I don't.
Yeah.
So I'm very blessed for the people that came before us, building the society and making it safe for everybody to be able to enjoy this world the best they can. And so when people complain about this stuff, I'm like, no, you can make it happen.
Yeah.
You may not perspective. You may come from, we're not all, you know, not, life isn't fair, and you may come from a lower starting point, you know, or anything like that. But there are tons of people that start higher than us that F it all up, and they're back down here with us too. So it's not like, you know,
deal with the hand you're dealt.
Yeah.
That's what life's about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's all, like you said, control the controllables.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my philosophy too, is like, if for whatever reason, if my career path doesn't work out now, then I know I've been there before. I know I can go get 3 jobs to survive again until I get back to where I want to go. And I'm willing to make that sacrifice.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of people, I'm telling you, man, like I talk to so many people like, oh, I would never do that. I would never do that. Oh, really? I'm sure if you didn't have food tomorrow, you would probably figure it out. I would hope you would, at least, like I would hope you would take a regular job, a menial task, just to get some money in your pocket instead of waiting for a free handout,
Yeah, and that really is almost the definition of wisdom, right? Is because you can talk, and one of the main reasons I'm doing the podcast is you can talk to other people who have seen the low lows and know that the grass is greener on the other side. Yeah. It really is, right? And someone like yourself, it's like, hey, I've been there. Right. I know that if you do get back into that position, you're going to work 3 jobs because you know that it will eventually become better. Yeah. And there's so many people out there who are just like, well, I could do everything right and it's still going to not work out. And those are the same folks who are not controlling their controllables and basically kind of complaining and having that victim mentality, which will only keep you at your current state. You will not grow out of it.
Let me just give an example. And I'm going to say it because he doesn't care, because he talks about this all the time. My cousin, who I was talking about earlier, he's one of the most successful people I know in my immediate family besides me, right? Yeah. And he's been to prison twice. He was a drug dealer. He got involved with gangs when he was young and got pulled into that lifestyle. Now he owns 5 houses. He's a convicted felon.
Yeah.
But he got his life together and he figured it out. If somebody like that, who's in a lot of it, he admit it was his stupidity and his choices. It's not like he was forcing anything. Nobody put a gun to his head, right?
Yeah.
He made some terrible life choices. He's now he owns the most houses in our family, you know, and he has a great career.
Yeah. It's that obstacle is the way,
Yeah, and it shaped into who he is today.
Absolutely.
And people look at him and they're like, he's this tatted up Mexican gangster looking guy, and people are like, whoa, what does your cousin do? And it's intimidating to people, but I'm like, yeah, actually he owns more houses than most people, and it's legitimate,
Yeah.
And so like you can pull your life together, and that's where I think, like, I wasn't raised, like going to the religion thing, I wasn't raised religious. Both my parents were raised religious technically. My mom kind of had a falling out, because she was very much like, women were treated kind of like crap back then, so we weren't raised that way. But one of the things I think about is like when people go through hard times, it's a great guiding tool for everybody. I always see religion as something with a set of tasks and goals and guidelines. Even if you don't believe in anything about it, the learning alone, and some of the lessons apply to everything, and so that's why I always tell people, like when people rip on religion and stuff, I'm like, no, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I studied world religions in college. I was really interested in it, and most religions have a lot of good lessons and values they can teach you, whether you follow it to a T or you pick and choose.
It's not the end all be all.
Yeah, I think they're a great guiding force, and some people need that. Some people aren't self-starters and they need someone to guide them or a set of lessons. And so I'm all for that. If you, whatever it may be, if you need someone to give you a nudge or you need like a structure, use things like that. They're important, whether it's this religion, or this religion, it's okay. If it gives you, if it helps mold you into something and it helps you be a better person or be more successful, I'm all for it, dude,
Yeah, and I'm pretty open about this, but I myself was pretty depressed a couple years ago, right? And I was always a hard worker. I always had success in my own way. Things were great, but I found myself a few years after college where I was like, okay, I did everything I was supposed to, right? Like I got a degree, I have a good career, I have more money than ever, I have more time than ever. Like, why the fuck am I still miserable? Yeah. And then I started to explore self-help and personal development and philosophy, which led me to Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius' Stoic philosophy, as well as Taoism. So Taoism, Lao Tzu, ancient Chinese philosophy. And I was like, what the hell? Like, man, these are thousands of years old, yet they still apply to the human mind and experience today. Like, what's going on with this, right? And I wasn't religious at all, right? And neither was my parents. Like, I grew up very secular, never went to church, never believed in any of that stuff. And I'm like, how the heck is something from thousands of years ago apply today. And it's because it is philosophy and compiled wisdom. So I always say religion, including even the Bible, is basically just a compilation of best practices on how to live better yourself and with other people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you can't just be a tyrant in your community because people will want to kill you and not want to work with you.
Yeah.
That's not going to work out, even though you're being selfish. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like there's all these... and again, it is just technically wisdom, but you can learn from the people before you. And again, find your nearest old person and talk to them. Like you can learn a lot from them. So
yeah, it's interesting you touch on. And I was going to talk about this earlier and I forgot, because as someone who took out, you think of the college dream, right? Like the American dream, but the college thing, right? I always, I think one of the things that upsets me nowadays is that when I was in school, in high school, right? They pushed everybody to college, and I was going to go regardless, right? Because I was, always pretty much in the running in the top of the class, top percentage of class, you know. So I always knew I wanted to go, but I remember, and I hate it to this day, but like basically, schools were pushing everybody to go to college, right? Which is like, you can have a whole other conversation about the devaluing of degrees, right? They don't really mean much anymore, for the most part. But I also, I hated this because I took auto shop, I took wood shop, I took all these things that they've cut out now, right? And even the music side of it too. They're cutting so many different things for people, but what I always remember is some of my friends who I used to skateboard with and hang out with, they made them feel like crap. They said, you're not worth anything unless you go to college, right?
Yeah.
You're stupid. Why would you want to be a mechanic? You know how much mechanics make now?
Yeah.
They don't have 50 grand worth of debt, which I had 60 grand worth of debt when I got out of school, which sets you at a disadvantage because it not only that they made these people feel like crap who were, like, as we know, most of the education, like, is fact memorization. Most of it doesn't apply to the real world. A lot of it, it's useful that you can read a book and take some tests, right? And I believe in some of that, right? But I also, like, you should be able to have careers and things that you're interested in. And I hated the fact that schools were pushing that, especially when at the early 2000s when I was getting out, they were starting to cut a lot of those programs and they basically forcing kids, like not forcing them, but like highly insinuating that if you don't go to a junior college or a college that you're never going to be anything in life, right? When you look at some of the kids that I knew that were like C students, doesn't, like we said, doesn't show actually how intelligent you are. Most of that stuff doesn't mean anything. Who started businesses, construction businesses, or went to biotech and went to school and learned how to work on cars.
Yeah.
Now you know what we need? Skilled labor in the United States.
Yeah.
We have such a
Plumbers.
shortage of it. We're importing all of them from like Canada and Mexico, like skilled labor, right? And we made a whole generation of kids or two feel like crap for wanting to go to metal shop or wood shop or auto shop or even the music side of things,
Yeah.
And you have all these kids now, including myself, that have changed. Like I said, I'm very grateful for my dad, for everything that he did, and it wasn't his fault that we didn't have money for school. My dad got remarried. It was just a whole mess with some things that went down. But it shaped me to who I am. But do I wish I could have made different choices without 50 grand, 60 grand of debt, being an indentured servant?
Yeah.
Basically, we've trained a whole generation, like, don't worry about the loans. We won't give you a loan to start a business.
Yeah.
But we're going to give you a guaranteed government-backed student loan that you can't discharge in debt, and
You pay off for 20 years, taking bits of your paycheck every fucking 2 weeks out to go pay for this crap.
I looked at the interest because I paid them off a few years ago, finally, everything, because I had private and government loans, almost 100 grand. And they were what I considered low interest back then, 3 to 6%. Some of them were fixed rates, which are annoying. Some were the variables because that's all my parents made just enough to where it was too much money to get anything, but not enough to get anything else.
To do it yourself, yeah.
Yeah, and so I look back on that and I'm like, I probably would have gone the entrepreneur path at a younger age if I didn't have all this debt.
Yeah.
Because it did, like, I just thought about life differently. Like I said, it took me a little while to get to where I needed to go, but like I wish more kids understood that. Like, college is not the end all be all. Yes, did I make a lot of great friends? Did I have a lot of great relationships? Did I learn a lot about myself, my work ethic?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like most of the education I learned is out the door.
Yeah.
I don't, and like I said, like I always say, unless you're a doctor, an engineer,
or a lawyer,
and that's something you want to do from like age 13 or 14, and not that you're going to do that forever, but yeah, those are highly specialized skills and highly specialized things where you need a degree. And I'm trying to make a blanket statement that all degrees don't mean much, but a lot of them, communication degrees, things like that, you can learn that by picking up a book.
Absolutely.
As we know, the biggest experts are not just because you have that piece of degree doesn't make you an expert. If you ask me about international relations, I know a little bit, but I'm not an expert just because I have a degree. There's people who probably read millions of books on that in their lifetime, and they know way more than I do. Just because I have a degree doesn't make me an expert in that subject, especially if I'm not practicing it anymore.
Yeah, and I think your experiences make you more credible than the lazy guy who got his master's degree or his MBA, right?
Yeah.
Just because he got that degree. And I have met so many people out there who they just go laser vision to get the degree, then get their master's, like, well, okay, I don't know what I want to do. Okay, let me just go get my PhD.
Yeah.
Hey, great, this guy's a doctor now, but he has zero skills and struggles to find a job, and then ends up doing something else where he doesn't need his degree. And it's like, well, what the hell was the benefit of that? So
I know.
I really resonate with that and agree with it because, dude, I half-assed my way throughout college. I won't lie. I had a bad GPA, but I got the degree. C's get degrees. And I'm glad I did it because early off in my career, there were jobs I applied to that required the bachelor's degree, right? So it's like I still needed it in my view. I always say, because I work in sales, you as well, if instead of me going to college for 4 years, I just did cold calling and did, fucking door-to-door sales and did that for 4 years, I would be way better off. I'd have the skills to allow me to perform better, and it would have just been a way better use of time. So I think that's actually changing, right? The perception of college these days and like how valuable is it? I think there's a lot of young men especially who are basically saying like, yeah, F that. I don't like all this social justice crap, and I don't want to fucking go to school and get told what to think. And I just want to go be a plumber because the only responsible man in my life is my uncle, who's a fucking plumber, and he makes good money and takes care of his kids.
$150K a year.
Dude, absolutely.
With no debt. I mean, you go to you go to a trade school for a year, you have to pay 10, 20 grand, maybe at most, but you can start work immediately.
Yeah.
You work under you work in a trade and you learn from somebody and you learn on the job skills, and that's great. And I wish, more people understood that. I hope that it's changing, and I feel like it is a little bit, and it's going back to what you were saying too. I talk about this a lot with people. It's like, I don't know, you're a lot younger than me, but like, I always appreciate the fact that when I was coming through elementary school, my teachers were all significantly older. They were born in like the 1930s. And I still there's a few of them still alive. Two of my favorite teachers that I go back and every once in a while I'll grab coffee with them because they taught me a lot.
Yeah.
One, my first grade teacher, I always get in trouble. I was always a good student, but I talked too much in class. I would always talk, not excessively to where some of the other kids that were getting kicked out every day, but I'd get told, hey, you got to go stand outside, and I'll always appreciate her because she shaped me. I always tell people, I had a tough teacher in first grade, but my parents empowered her to take, they gave her hey, if he's acting up,
wave your finger at him.
Yeah. It's not like nowadays where parents are like, what
did the teacher do to my kid?
Yeah. Or they blame everybody but their kid.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know there's a generational difference because I remember all my friends, moms, and dads, even when we went to friends' houses, figured they're acting up, give me a call, right?
Yeah.
They allowed them to kick our ass. If we were out of line, they're doing stupid stuff where I think we've lost that. And I always remember those teachers that I had, I'm so grateful because they came from a different generation where they grew up on farms and stuff. And you don't do what you're told and you're getting your ass kicked, and you better listen to me. And everybody respected their elders and parents. And then we didn't really, the other thing is we didn't really know about their personal life. I remember finding out my fourth grade teacher had a husband, and he passed away, but she told us one day a story about him, but we never knew, we never knew about there's a respect level, right? You didn't know about what's going on in their inner workings, which I think is important sometimes it's cool to break the mold. I get it. Sometimes you want to get to know someone more. I think as a kid though, you probably should not know about all that stuff, regardless of where they lean, you don't need to be sharing all your personal, because you want these kids to respect you and understand you as a teacher first, right? Yeah. Whether you're gay or straight, doesn't matter. But my teachers never talked about that stuff.
Yeah.
They never did.
They really
We didn't even know they were married. They never would talk about it, they may have a picture on their desk, but it was flipped the other way.
Yeah.
So we never knew, and we always respect them because they're not our friend, right?
Yeah.
They were our teacher.
Well, same with parenting as well. I think that's a big shift that's happened in the recent 10, 20 years is parents are so preoccupied with wanting to be friends with their kids.
I know.
But you do need to be a parent first. And I don't have kids, right? Not that I know of. But I know that you need to be a parent first, and then you could be their friend. And that's how my parents were. And like you talk about the older generation, learning a lot and being grateful for that. My mom was 41 when I was born, and my dad was 42. So like they were way older than my parents' friends, right?
Yeah.
But I'm always extremely grateful that that was the case, because they taught me the old school mentality, right? Like even if they in many ways are very accepting and kind of live and let live in many ways. Like if I didn't want to go to school, they fucking slap me across the face and make sure I go, right? If I got in trouble for not doing my homework, I'm getting yelled at or disciplined, right? So, hey, we butt heads growing up here and there, but after college, and in college, I extremely have a good relationship with my parents, and still to this day, I see them multiple times a week. And now as a adult man, am invested in them living well and investing in them being taken care of. And I think that's the right way to do things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think it also there's like when I look at people, and I want to make this note too, because I don't have kids either. Right. But I'll never forget, I dated a girl not too long ago that had a son. She had a daughter too, but the daughter didn't live with her. But the son, I remember just seeing her struggling with that, because he's a boy, he needs a male influence, and I kind of took him under my wing, I guess, for the most part. And she was still tying his shoes, and he was already in first grade, and cutting his food. And I was like, you can't be doing that. He needs to learn, like any kid, whether it's a boy or a girl, they need to know this shit before they go to school, because he's going to get made fun of. And also, it's just not empowering to do your stuff for your kids still, right? At that age, dress them and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we went to a restaurant in La Jolla, really good breakfast spot. And I remember telling her, I was like, you know what, since I'm in your life, I'm not his dad, but I'm going to take him under my wing. You have to allow me to discipline him. And she agreed to that, And I said, hey, buddy, you're going to cut all your own food today. I'm going to show you how to cut your food, right? And you're going to finish your food, because I remember when I was a kid, my parents would not, if you didn't want to finish your food, well, good luck. Put it in the fridge, and you got to come back and eat that later. We're not making you anything else. You eat what's in front of you. And sometimes you hated that as a kid, but you look back on it, it was a great lesson, right? So I wanted to instill that in him. And I said, you're going to learn how to cut your food. I'm going to show you a few times, right? Because he knew. He was just being a little craphead because his mom was empowering him.
Yeah, it's the easier route. Let my mom take care of it.
Yeah. So showed him how to cut his food, right? And then made him eat all his food. It happened one or two times, right? And then same thing with tying his shoes. I'll never forget, we were at a gym in Claremont, right? And there's a reason why I'm bringing them both up, right? He didn't know how to tie his shoes. She was tying them all the time. And I was like, you can't be doing that either. He needs to learn how to tie his shoes. He's 6, almost 7 now, you know? Showed him how to do it both ways, the normal way and then the bunny loop way. Ears, I was like, you can choose whatever way you want. Nobody does the bunny loop way, but everybody does this way, But I'll never forget, and this is what I knew when parents, what they feel as a kid. Obviously not my kid, but I took an interest in him, right? Came up to me like a week later after I'd shown him, and we sat there for 30 minutes showing him and just practicing, right? He's like, Gabe, I want to show you. I can tie my own shoes. I was like, all right, show me, buddy. He showed me, and he was so proud to show me. And that's when I knew, how parents feel. Even though he wasn't my kid and I wasn't around him every day, you get that understanding of how it is to empower your kids, right? How you feel when they accomplish something that, people say you can only get if you have kids, right? You don't know what it's like to have kids, Now I do. Not on and I raised them, pretty well for the most part, the time that I was in his life. But I think back on that as another lesson that will guide me in my future too, with how I interacted with kids of women that I dated that may have had a kid, and how much of an impact you can make on their life, even for little small things like that. And talking about the friends, being a friend, I wasn't his friend. I've teased him, we had some fun. I taught him how to skateboard,
played around, hung
skateboard and stuff, but I demanded respect.
Yeah.
Not like an asshole, because there's a difference between being an asshole and actually being, like you said, stoic, demanding respect. And he wants to give respect because he wants to impress me, whatever it may be, right? But that whole thing about being friends with your kid, it's kind of like a plague nowadays. Yeah. And I see that a lot of people have kids and don't understand the impact you can have on them, like that impact I had for a positive thing, right? The negative side of it too. Yeah. You're sitting there on your iPad, you give your kid an iPad, he's sitting there, he's struggling with homework, or she, and you're out there sipping a martini and going out to fucking happy hours with your friends instead of spending time home and educating your kid. Like, my mom stayed home when we were at kids and didn't work. She worked part-time a little bit later and then went back to work once we were kind of up and ready, like around second grade. We didn't really need much anymore. And, you have to take that interest in your kids. You can't be selfish. My aunt always says, if you want to have kids, it's the most unselfish thing you have to do. You can't be any selfish. And if you feel like you can't do it, then you probably shouldn't. And I take that to heart all the time because I'm selfish at times, I think I'd be a great dad, but there's also things where I'm like, oh, I don't know, and I know also if sometimes when you're put in that situation, because some of my friends, and I want to go off on this tangent for a second, is like some of my friends that you didn't think would be good fathers, they stepped up to the plate. Not all of them.
Whipped them into shape.
It whipped them into shape. Not all of them, but a lot of them, you're like, wow, dude, you're a great dad, and you were just like the stoner guy I used to hang out with and skateboard, and you always getting into trouble. Yeah. But sometimes that helps them ground them, not that a kid should necessitate that, but it does help both people, right?
Yeah, you grow as an adult by having a kid, and that's another one of those human experiences, right? Or human stories, right? For thousands of years, like, yeah, we've had kids, and you do have to be selfless to raise that kid. But there was one point you mentioned that I want to kind of double click on is teaching the kid to think for himself and learn how to do these things even if he fails. Yep. And there's one of my favorite psychologists, Jordan Peterson, talks about how the good mother necessarily fails. And I think he quotes, there's some other guy said it, but the concept is like, you want your kid to be able to learn how to do these things, like tie his shoe, right? Because if you're just doing it for him, he doesn't know how to do that. And you have to ask yourself as a human, like, do you want your kid to be a capable man or woman? Most people say yes, of course, right? Like, but if you want your kid to be a capable man, he needs to learn how to fucking tie his shoes.
And to fail.
And to fail. And to not touch the stove when it's hot. And to not fucking do this over here, whatever it may be. And the unfortunate thing is, like you mentioned, it is kind of like a plague these days where the parents want to be friends with their kids. And unfortunately, we live in this kind of like helicopter mom era, which it's been around for 20 years or so, but we are seeing the negative consequences of it. Because if you do want your kid to be a capable man, a capable man is not living in his mom's basement, right? And the guy who's living in his mom's basement was wrapped up in bubble wrap growing up and had every little thing done for him and wasn't told no when he did something stupid. But even if you're uncomfortable with getting told no, I'm grateful my parents told me not to do this, not to do that, because fuck, I learned now. Now I don't do those things.
Yeah, and I think about this in another way too. I'm going to use an example. I have an aunt that lives in Hollywood that's, she knows people out there just from living there for so long. And she's self-made. She left her hometown of Dixon, where my mom grew up, went out and she was making $200,000-300K in the 80s. Yeah. Working in the fashion industry. And she did very well for herself and now just kind of works for herself now. And she's met a lot of people. And I'll never forget this story she told me recently. This is like a symptom of modern society, right? And I'm not saying it didn't happen back then either, but like a famous Hollywood director did a favor for one of their mutual friends to hire her daughter on, who's a little bit younger than me. I want to say now she's probably like 32, 33, as a personal assistant, as a favor. He's like, you know what, I'll give her a job, She sucked at her job, and her mom calls the director, this guy, and starts complaining about how he let her go. Can you imagine 30 years ago, 20 years ago, your mom calling your boss to say, why did you fire my daughter? Or why is she not working there anymore? I see that a lot. And I saw that a lot at our previous company when people would complain about the work that we did. Hey, it wasn't great, right, at certain points. But your parents are not, you're an adult. Yeah. Whether you think your brain, they say your brain doesn't mature until you're 25, right? But you're legally an adult. You can go be drafted, you can do this, you can do that.
You can go to prison, yeah.
This is your job. This is not your parents' job. It's not their job to look after you. I mean, yes, can they help you and assist you when you're in a dark place or something wrong has happened? Yeah, you would hope that your parents will help you, but they're not. Your day-to-day, they need to empower you to fail and to make poor decisions sometimes and good decisions. But I can't imagine, like, if, let's say that, your job, you suck and your mom's not going to call your boss and say, "Why'd you fire my son?" Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's very common nowadays, though, and that's the symptom of the helicopter parenting. And it's even worse with cell phones now. Like, at least it started, they say it started in the late '80s, early '90s. I don't feel like it was quite that level yet, but now with cell phones, parents giving we just had this conversation yesterday. Like, some of the school districts are finally starting to ban cell phones in the classrooms, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was in school, passing notes, like, you get in trouble for that,
Yeah.
And obviously mostly girls did it. Guys maybe did it a little bit, but I don't remember too much for that. But talking class, I remember I had a Game Boy. You can't bring your Game Boy out in class. And obviously I knew better than that. But there were kids I remember like pulling out their Game Boy.
Getting in trouble for it.
Tamagotchi or Gigapet. Yeah, everybody had little things. And nowadays they're just letting kids do that in class. And the teachers can't do anything.
Yeah.
Because, I need to get a hold of my son. You don't need to get a hold of your son. He's in school. He's supposed to be learning. Or she's in school. She's supposed to be learning. You don't need to talk to your son and text them all day.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Not only that, you're creating this link until where they have to rely on you all the time for guidance, whether they do it subconsciously or consciously. And then you're also distracting them from what their task is.
Yeah.
To go to school and learn. Whether you agree with that education or not, they're still there to learn, right?
The bird has to leave the nest.
Yeah.
It literally does.
So I'm really glad that, reflecting on that schools are finally trying to do something with that, because I've seen that with some of my friends who had kids that are like teenagers now, and it's like we're a victim of our own mindset, and sometimes you don't know what's best for you.
Yeah.
Right? I think we've all thought that when we're especially when we're unruly teenagers, like, you don't know what you're talking about, Dad.
Yeah.
Actually, he does. And you may not realize that till you're like 25 to 30, but you look back like, oh, he was right, That's why he didn't want me to do drugs, He didn't want me to do these things, because it can distract you from your mission at hand or what they think you should accomplish,
Yeah. And really, a lot of the parents who do the helicopter parenting, they are prioritizing compassion, right? So they're basically saying, and here's the thing, it's like, we get it. You love your kid, right? And they're like, well, I love my kid. That's why I wrap him up in bubble wrap. And it's like, well, I get that, but the problem is you're setting him up for failure. He's going to turn into the man in his mom's fucking basement, right? Like, is that compassionate? In my view, no, right?
No.
Because he's going to have financial problems. He's going to have relationship problems. He's not going to be able to hold a stable job. Like, that doesn't sound compassionate to me. The good mother necessarily fails, right? And I always reference this, but my second favorite psychologist, Dr. Jonathan Haidt, wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And basically, he's a psychologist, so he's done all these studies and talks about how kids born after 95, so mainly Gen Z, and I'm Gen Z, I'm born 97. So kids born after 95, we had this like kind of scare of like kids getting abducted and like, which is a real thing, stranger danger. Like
24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, totally valid concern, right? But parents took it overboard and they really started to keep their kids in, right? And if you talk about kids who were born in the 80s or so, they were maybe 6 years old when they were allowed to go out and play on their bike, and their parents weren't really watching what they're doing. Kids born after 95, it's closer to the age of 11. There are negative consequences of keeping your kids indoors like that. So he talks about how, the stranger danger, parents were keeping them in. And then in 2012 is where kids were now getting access to the internet and phones.
At a young age,
in the undeveloped brain. But I could go on all day about some of the work he's done, but his more recent book, he talks about how kids are on their phones too much. And he actually campaigns across the United States like, I'm a fucking psychologist. Don't let kids use their iPhones in school. Like, I don't think kids should have an iPhone until they're 15. But either way, you shouldn't have this in class because you're not fucking learning anything. And they have tried it where some schools, they take it away. And guess what? The kids are actually talking to each other and having fun and all this stuff. And it's like, guys, like, we know that this is a bad thing. Like, let's just start making this more commonplace.
And then you don't have to, and for everybody out there, you don't have to look farther than most of the tech billionaires don't even let their own kids play. I mean, you can read countless articles like, I would never give my kid an iPad or a laptop and things like that at that age. But you also look at like documentaries that explored, and I remember, the difference I was able to see as a young adult, the difference between, using a computer when you come home from school, right, and you log on, and you only have a limited amount of time because there's everybody in the house is using it, right, and I had two stepbrothers and a brother, and then my parents, right, and we had like two computers, but like, Not for a while, we only had one, so you had to share it, you know. And social media and cell phones weren't a thing really yet, so you didn't have it in your pocket all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Instant access. Right. If you logged onto MySpace back then, you logged in like a few times a day after school, you know, and you didn't check it till the next day after school. Right. You know, and when you look at how they wire. The Social Media Dilemma was a great documentary. I always remember. I probably should rewatch it again. But they talk about how they built a lot of these apps, especially now with modern, you know, social media interfaces to be addicting. Right?
Yeah.
They talk about it. People who have created this technology of like, we base it off of when we were trying to monetize these things and actually make money off these apps and not just be a, you know, because I get it, it's a business, right? Unfortunately,
they're trying to make money. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's the drawback of like, you know, there's a lot of consequences that come with the money that does come with that, but they modeled it after casinos.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't think casinos can be addicting for people and you think that that should be wired into most of the apps that we use, right? And a lot of these things, like, you know, some of these games that you play on, like I never really was into like the smartphone games,
Mm-hmm.
but I know people whose parents and even older people who've gotten hooked on them and paying for these things. And
like Candy Crush.
Yeah,
and all
Candy
that
Crush,
stuff.
I know someone who spent a lot of money on Candy Crush.
Yeah.
And it's a cool game. I would never pay for it, you know, but it's a move towards these addictive technologies and gameplay and a lot of these things to make people get sucked into that.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's just like TikTok, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the specifically the fact that these are short videos,
Mm-hmm.
the short burst of whatever you're flipping through.
Dopamine.
Yeah, they understand how the human mind works, and they've created a technology to keep the human mind sucked into it for ads and all this other stuff. But yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about how it's less about the content that they're watching. Like, doesn't even matter if they're looking at cats or girls or whatever it is. It's the fact that they're short videos. And you have all these people now who are sucked into TikTok. I've, thank God, never downloaded it, but I have Instagram and all this stuff, right? So, but I've been there doom scrolling, and you totally get sucked in. And
you're just getting your fix all day.
Yeah, you're getting your fix all day, and I've talked to so many people who are like, man, I can't even sit through a movie these days. It's like, wow, like, but it's true, like that. If your brain can only focus on something for 7 to 10 seconds, yeah, like it's gonna be difficult to fucking work. Like, imagine trying to work, and now you're so sucked into that.
You've rewired your brain.
Yeah,
long term, and it takes a lot to fix it. I get mad when some of the girls I've dated, you know, I'm like, I'm a big movie guy. And I've been guilty of opening my phones from movies sometimes, you know. But you know, if you can't sit through a movie and like watch a film, you're missing so much, right?
Yeah.
And what I learned is if somebody is like not in the present, if you're in their presence, right, they should be commanding your attention, right? Whoever you're texting or contacting or whatever app you're on for social media, whatever it may be, that's not important. Those people aren't here. They're not in front of you, right? There is something to be said, and I'm going to go off on another tangent right now about, like, I always talk about this. I'm glad that I grew up in this era too, like last kind of analog era, they always say, you know? But like when I was a young man, right? And I think this is the fear of all parents too, right? Like when you look at modern dating, you know, especially for younger kids, when you look at how much access they have already through social media and cell phone apps, right? And texting. When I was young, you had to call a home line, and usually a parent picked up, right? So you talk to the dad, you're like, hey, is Maria home or is Perla home or whoever it is, you know? Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, who's this? Blah, blah, blah. Hey, it's for you. Hey, we'd like to, if you call a couple more times, like, we want you to come over for dinner because you're obviously talking to our daughter, right?
Yeah, get to know you.
Yeah, parents get to know who you are, right? There's a boundary, right? I think about if I was a young man now, our vices and the way our brains are wired, if we had those cell phones when I was same, I feel bad for these kids, you know, nowadays same. For many reasons, a myriad of reasons. But I know as a young man, I would do the same thing they're doing nowadays. There would be no boundary. What those boundaries do is teach you respect for that girl. They teach you, you know, how to move from step to step in a relationship. You get to know the parents, right? Before you get to know the girl that much, you know? Like, because, like, you know them from school, but you don't really know them, you know? And so, like, your parents, they're kind of doing an interview, like, you know, even at that young age, like 12, 13, 14, when you're in middle school, you know, high school. And it takes a lot of courage. It doesn't take courage to send a text. Mm-hmm. You can send, I mean, yeah, can it sometimes? Maybe. But a lot less. A lot less. It took a lot of balls to call a girl's house after she gave you her number, and you're like, oh, if she picks up, I'd actually almost rather the dad pick up so then I can, kind of
Warm up a little
bit, you know. But it took a lot, and there's many a times that I would hang up. I think every guy, like guys around my age, we all talk about that, like in our 30s, because we were kind of the last guys that dealt with house phones,
Yeah.
And so it took a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage to walk up to a girl and ask her to the school dance. It doesn't take a lot of courage to send a text and say, like, hey, I'm going to the dance on Friday. You want to roll?
Yeah. Or comment on her photo or DM her.
Yeah. And how does that change the dynamic on how we value each other?
Yeah.
Right. And we can go into a whole conversation on how that affects the way we view our partners and potential partners. Right.
Yeah.
And the access to have them at any given stage, I was talking to one of the security guards that works the building, and he's an older gentleman. And so we get along. I'm kind of like an old soul. I love talking about old stuff, and we were talking about, partnerships, right? Basically, husband and wife, whatever it may be, right? You don't have access. Like in the old days, you didn't have access to each other all day. You go to work and you see each other when you get home, and you have stuff to talk about, right? Nowadays, my girlfriend right now, I told her, like, I love sending reels, but I got to stop because I want to have something to talk about when we get home, Like, it's too much contact. Too much contact. You need to have that space away. We get sick of each other easier if you're talking to each other constantly every day, all day, and there's no tasks that you're just completely isolated from them for a little bit. It cheapens the experience, it devalues it, and you don't miss them, right? I think most people would agree with me on that. And so I think that has changed a lot of the male-female dynamics in modern society too, is we have too much access to each other.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, I remember when cell phones first started coming out, like, mainstream. Obviously they were around since the late 80s, but only rich people had them, like any technology.
Like a mobile phone.
Yeah. But I remember when the first kids when we were juniors and seniors started getting cell phones. And I remember I used to have a 54 Ford pickup, and I always remember this memory. And I remember my buddies were getting cell phones, like the little flip color phones, and stuff.
Like the Razor.
Yeah. And it was just like, so my buddy's like, why don't you want one? I'm like, dude, because I don't want people. I remember saying this, and obviously we've all fallen into it now. I'm like, I don't want people to contact me all day. If I'm driving and cruising in my truck, I don't want people to call me while know what I'm doing, right? And like, I just want to chill, And now that's normalized. Now we have emotional attachment to phones. And whether you think it's right or wrong, like, people get upset. You didn't text me back on time.
Yeah.
You didn't respond for 3 days. And granted, some people, I've been guilty of that too. I try to respond to people as quickly as possible because I know that people get sensitive about that stuff, and it's a respect thing, Well, it's especially if it's like, on our time. We have it all the time. It's not like, Yeah,
and if it's a relationship or maybe like someone you live with, you want to make sure that they're okay, but not necessarily like every hour you got to be texting or sending something, right?
Yeah. But now, like, it's so crazy because you would be the odd one now. If you try to go back in time, it's like, I'm not going to answer my phone while I'm at work, and don't call me, or don't text me. Like, you look like the weirdo, which is sad.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it used to be. We didn't communicate all the time. And now, like, think about it. When you get home, you've already been talking all day. Like, how's work going? Like, oh, this person, this and that, and, well, what are you talking about when you get home, right? I mean, there are things, but it's different,
Yeah, and like you said, there's more contact, and it's a lot more of the wrong type of contact, right?
Dopamine
it's like
hits, yeah.
Little dopamine hits, and really, like, the more online we have, the less in person people tend to be with one another. And I know a lot of people out there who are super popular on social media, and they hardly ever see another human on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, which there are negative trade-offs to that. Absolutely.
My buddy was talking about this recently too, and because he was, going on dates and stuff. He's engaged now, but we were talking about that before he went through all that. Like, he's used to, like, my generation because he's like 2-3 years younger than me, 2, I think, something like that. And he'd call girls like, hey, I'm coming on my way, I'm outside, and girls would, go to voicemail, and then they text him right after that, like, oh, okay, I'll meet you down there. And he'd call him when he get there. Oh, they ignore the call, and like, all right, I'll be down in a second. And it's like, it's so different, and I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
Like, we're human. We need to have that constant talking and human experience, and we're cheapening everything to, like, texts. And we all know you can have a text conversation for 3 days that could be achieved in 5 minutes,
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's why I like, people over 30, people over 35, people over 40, have experienced more of the life before the online world, right? Because like I started high school in 2012. That's where everyone started to get fucking iPhones and Twitters and Snapchat, and it's like, and everyone I remember wanting an iPhone and having social media because like everyone else had it, right? And it's the same thing with like people who were working in the office before the pandemic. You have a whole different experience than the people who are just getting into it, and it's like, this is what fucking life is. Like, what the hell is miserable, right? But I think hearing wisdom from folks like yourself and other folks who are, a little bit older than myself and older than Gen Z, can share that type of wisdom and be like, hey, I fucking experienced both. And like, I choose to be offline more. Like, I think it's good to have more face-to-face interaction. Like, so I think it's helpful. And I think there's a lot more kids who are kind of picking their head up and being like, I'm going to delete my social media. Yeah. Like, I want to go be a plumber. I want to go work, do something in person. So I'm happy for it.
Yeah. And I always I don't want to completely rag on Gen Z because every generation has its flaws. None of them are perfect, obviously. Yeah. And there's a lot of different things for each one going back to the greatest generation even, but one thing I do, I had mixed feelings about, because there's some things I don't agree with, like the silent quitting and stuff, because I have employers that are like, dude, this kid didn't show up to work. But I also understand that I'm very proud of Gen Z for not conforming to soulless corporate jobs. I do kind of admire them for they're traveling at a younger age, or they're kind of more about the experience, at least the ones that I've seen, they're like, I'm going to go travel and do stuff. Granted, you still need money, obviously, to do that, so you can't just
responsibility.
Yeah. There's certain things that you're like, well, you got to have some stability too. Even if I agree with your lifestyle, it looks so much fun, that you guys are traveling. I didn't travel really till I was older, Yeah. But I do appreciate that they're making steps, at least a lot of them that I see, to have more of the experience, the human experience. They're trying. It seems like they're trying, like we were talking about, to deplug a little bit from some of that stuff. I see some of them I don't have an Instagram anymore. Yeah. Especially the younger ones. Like when you meet people who's kids and stuff. And they're like, I don't have an Instagram. Yeah. So I do appreciate that, because I think even my generation, we fall into my generation's at the perfect time where they're trying to keep up with the young kids still. Yeah. And you see people trying to dress. I'm like, dude, just dress how you want to dress. You don't have to worry about keeping up with the Joneses anymore, Yeah. And just live your life, So I do appreciate Gen Z for certain qualities that they have, Yeah. I do, I think there's some flaws like anything, but I do appreciate that they're making efforts to enjoy the human experience of life a little more at certain times,
Yeah, and I think even kind of in that same vein, I mentioned to you, I maybe a good place for us to wrap up too. Yeah. Is I always like to ask my guests, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of San Diego, America, the world, humans, young men, young women? What do you hope to see based on everything you've learned in your life to see us do more of or less of, or anything in that category?
I think I would have a lot to say on all those subjects, so it's hard to pick one. But I think, the big thing, and, I've always been very pro-business, but I also know the cost of doing business, right? And I know that I could make arguments for both sides and the flaws I see in, the future of, just making, basically fucking people over to make an extra buck, which I've never been one of those people. I don't want to fuck people over for an extra buck, Mm-hmm. But I'm worried. I am worried about AI. I'm worried. I hope that we don't lose, with this advancement of technology, which is probably going to be the biggest, bigger than steam and some of these things that we've had. Electricity obviously is probably the biggest, because allowed us to store food and different things, but
plumbing,
there's
technology is good, but we do tend to learn what the negative aspects are through every evolution, right?
Yeah. And I think this one scares me a little bit. And like I said, there's a lot of good that's come from it. Seems like there's some cool things coming from it, but I'm also worried at the cost of what makes us human, right?
Yeah, the humanity.
And I think we're going to go through a lot of growing pains economically, because you're going to have a lot of jobs displaced, more so than any in history. My thoughts on that, at least. And there's not going to be other positions for these jobs. You can't, if you're 55 years old and you're working a data entry job somewhere, it's hard to get the life skills you can do it, but there's also age discrimination. There's things and I get it from a business owner, you're not going to hire a 60-year-old who's going to, take up your retirement plan, and things like that. And health insurance is going to be a lot more expensive. I get it. Even though it's effed, I get it.
Yeah.
But I am worried about that. I'm hoping that, people learn to live with this technology, but not lose what makes us human. And the problem is I see a lot of misuse that's going to come of this, obviously we see with some of the deep fakes, photo faking, misinformation, which has been going on for a while. Counterintelligence is like way other countries attack other countries with misinformation. But now we're using it against ourselves politically. And then we're also, I'm a creative. I'm not a creative and like I'm good at any particular thing, but I'm an idea person. But I'm not good at, like, I couldn't write a song. I couldn't do any of this. I fear for a lot of the creatives because a lot of, you can make a song. I could go make a song with an AI technology that is already trained to do that. I'm not a music person. I enjoy music. I love rock and roll. I love all that stuff. But I couldn't write you a song. My brain is not wired that way, even if I was to train in it. I'm just not wired to think that way.
Yeah.
But now I could go become famous by making a fake AI music.
Yeah.
And that scares me because the people who are really good at that stuff are going to be displaced. And I look to those people to lead for those arts, and that scares me because there's AI art out there, like a lot, like that takes away humanity. That's not just displacement of jobs. Those are things that have been around since the beginning of music, art, the writing, I love that people use ChatGPT for remedial tasks, but like at what point does it displace books in the future?
Yeah. Well, it's like even having the calculator on your phone. It's a little harder to do math sometimes, right? Because it's so much easier to do it.
Think about it. Last thing I'll leave you with on this is like if you could train an AI to write like Ernest Hemingway books, right? Well, let's write a book that's in the vein of Ernest Hemingway. People are going to laud it. Oh my God, this is great.
Yeah.
I'm not a writer, but somebody could do that.
Yeah.
And then where does that leave the people who actually do those creative things?
Yeah.
And then also all the other remedial job, other jobs that, are being replaced. That's what scares me. And I think it's going to create a huge, the thing is even bigger divide between the wealthy and the have-nots.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's not just even the people that want to make something out of themselves, like we talked about earlier. Where do you go? And it may not be in our lifetime, and maybe in the next,
100 years,
100
maybe.
years. Yeah, but I think I think there really is going to be a huge gap
for sure
in the haves and have-nots with everything displaced, and I think we're going to go through some growing pains. And I think maybe the last thing I'll leave you on with that is that people always talk about population shrinkage, and maybe this is the point where, a whole generation of people has to struggle, whether you philosophically believe in that or not, that in order to shrink the population, because we're definitely not the population that we have with the amount of job loss that I think is going to occur in industry loss. I don't think people are going to have to be on the universal, even though I don't agree with it. Like, I think that's going to have to happen because otherwise you're going to have more people out in the streets.
Yeah.
And I don't want that out there, So
yeah.
I think that's just a symptom that's going to happen with a lot of this technology moving forward, So like I said, last thing is like I hope people find a way to use it for good. And obviously there'll always be bad, but still retain humanity.
Yeah.
No,
and I agree with that myself, and I think a lot of the psychologists I like and enjoy listening to have that same concern, right? Because technology and evolution is good, right, for us to evolve and keep growing, but there are growing pains, and the more that we start to lose our own humanity is usually when you start to see issues, right? Like whether that is the population shrinking, or I even see all this stuff coming out about like AI girlfriends. Yeah. It's like, okay, how the fuck are we going to procreate and recreate and all that stuff when people are just like finding whatever AI girlfriend that they've morphed together, like I like black hair and blue eyes, and then they're chatting with this person who's keeping them sucked in, and all of a sudden you've seen the movie WALL-E, right, where we're all just kind of like fat blobs that don't talk to each other. I kind of see that that's where we're going to head if we start to lose our humanity, which is a completely viable option if we keep going down this route.
Gattaca, dude.
Yeah.
You seen that movie?
I don't think I have.
Okay, watch Gattaca is one of my favorite movies, and everybody out there watch this movie because it came out in 97. Great movie. It kind of entails what I think is happening with the genetic engineering side of things, how you'd be able to pick a baby soon, and basically they talk about the difference between God-born children conceived naturally. In that movie, it's a topic, and being flawed because we're made with, male and female DNA that, could have issues with it, right? Versus I can pick my baby in a lab which we can kind of do now.
Yeah.
And then that movie, they kind of were able to pick, do you want to be good at this? Do you want to be good at that? I think we're there because they've done so much with DNA now and AI, training in AI, there's just so much that can go bad with that, like I said, in tying back into your AI girlfriends thing, like you're losing the humanity aspect, whether you want a relationship or not. That's an integral fact of continuing on society that needs to happen. Whether it's for economic reasons or for child rearing purposes, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to go make an attempt to talk to a girl. A girl has to be, acquiescing to a man in terms of like, okay, if I want a child, I have to work with this guy.
You got to learn how to tie your shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you eliminate all those things, what? Now you're just going to go to a bank to have a kid all the time? You're going to have an AI girlfriend instead of actually learning to deal with women and learning the good and bad. And women like, he's just a sperm donor. I'm going to go down to the sperm bank and he doesn't need a dad.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's the world we're going to live in the next 20 to 30 years, I think. It's just sad. So, yeah.
It scares me as well, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but hey, man, I know, you and I been texting about this basically for a couple months now, and I you're an interesting character. I know we only briefly met, but I appreciate people who hustle. I appreciate people who learning more about you and your upbringing. I'm not surprised with some of the experiences that you've had and kind of how it shapes you. And most importantly, I think like I'm very grateful and appreciative that you were willing to offer your time to young Americans out there who are depressed and lost and looking for advice. So I think the more people like us who have seen our fair share of ups and downs can come together and show that it's okay to talk and be vulnerable and share these experiences is helpful for us, but also helpful for other people. So I appreciate you and thank you.
Yeah, and I'd love anytime, I'd love to talk more because there's a lot of other things that I thought about as we were talking that popped into my head. I'm like, oh, I'd love to cover that topic, because there's interesting stuff that that has changed, and I always like to examine the changes in life. So
well, we'll do this again for sure. That's the beauty of the podcast, and I'm looking forward to connecting with your network and sharing mine with yours, and we'll do this again, man.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Appreciate it. Thank you so
Awesome.
much. Yeah,
for sure. Appreciate it, brother.